This final panel is on the standards, technologies, and policies necessary for municipal readiness. This will be an interactive conversation between the panelists with a general theme around municipal readiness. What are the challenges that we're facing? And then what are some of the potential solutions that can be done now and in the future? I'd like to invite the audience to participate throughout the panel discussion, and we will get to as many of those questions as possible in due course. I'd like to start off by inviting the panelists to introduce themselves, and we'll start with Bern Grush, the co-founder and Chief Innovation Officer at Harmonize Mobility.
Thanks, Dan. This is such a great conference. So happy to be here. So happy to be involved. My name is design engineer and a human factors engineer. Thanks so much to Jason for mentioning that as an important discipline. What I do is I focus on large area deployment of automated systems. For example, the acceptance of automation at level 4 and the acceptance of vehicle sharing. So all of the work that we do or I do is in that area. So all of this work is targeted at reducing private vehicle ownership. That's the focus of everything. For example, one of the systems that we have is to manage micro-subsidies to increase transit use and to reduce private vehicle use. But most importantly for today, we lead the ISO project to address automated vehicles at the curb and the standards for the automated robots on the sidewalk. And this standard especially addresses all of the issues that Deepak Darda and Bruce Morey outlined from IBI Group today. That was a very valuable talk, and it leads exactly into all the things that I'm doing and I'm going to be talking about throughout this conversation. Thanks.
Thanks, Bern. I agree. I tuned in for that morning session as well, and it read like a close here coming now. So it's very, very relevant. Thank you, Bern. I'd now next like to introduce Scott. Looks like Scott's having some trouble, so I'll come back to Scott. I'll introduce next Jamie. Jamie Austin is the Deputy General Manager of Business Services at Durham Region Transit. Over to you, Jamie, for a brief self-introduction.
Yes, thanks, Dan, and great to be here today as well. Share what some of the exciting work that we're doing at Durham Region Transit, and Dan mentioned that I'm the Deputy General Manager for Business Services, where I'm responsible for a broad range of financial, customer service, IT, other administrative responsibilities for the organization, in addition to leading efforts to modernize our transit services for the benefit of our passengers and the public in areas such as fleet electrification, new service models that include autonomous and connected vehicles, contactless fare payment, and other solutions. I actually came to Durham Region Transit about 3 years ago from the Ministry of Transportation Ontario. There I led policy and regulatory efforts to leverage and incentivize emerging technologies to maximize the public benefit when it comes to things like safety and sustainability and congestion management. And this included leading ministry's policy efforts to support autonomous and connected vehicles, which included the establishment of AVIN at the time, as well as electric vehicles, cycling, road pricing, and other emerging issues. So thank you again. Great to be here. I look forward to the discussion.
Thanks for joining us, Jamie. Very happy to have you on the panel. I see, Scott, looks like your challenges have been overcome. So I will now head on over to Scott Butler, the Executive Director at the Ontario Good Roads Association.
Thanks, Dan. My name is Scott Butler, Executive Director at OGRA. We are the oldest municipal association, I believe, in Canada, certainly in Ontario, having been founded in 1894. So we've been at this game for 127 years. Our membership is comprised of approximately 430 and roughly 430 municipal members in Ontario, and approximately 20 First Nations. We've been looking at the issue of connected and autonomous vehicles for, I would say, the last 5 years in earnest. And when it comes to the issue of here to douse any sort of enthusiasm the panel may have.
Thank you, Scott. And last but not least, we have Michael Polowin, who is a partner at Gowling.
And thank you.
Please say a few words.
I guess Scott and I are going to be the wet blankets at the party. I'm a partner at Gowling WLG. I'm also the leader of Gowling's National Municipal Law Group. In that role, we spend an awful lot of time fighting, conversing with cities on a variety of issues. And about 5 years ago, we were asked to speak at a conference by the put on by the Conference Board of Canada on the issue of automated vehicles. And so we knew nothing about it, and we had to educate ourselves. And like this, it was about the readiness of municipalities. Our conclusion 5 years ago, and every time we've been asked since, is municipalities are simply not ready. There's an explanation for that, which is that municipalities do not have the human and financial resources necessary to do the kinds of in-depth research that will be required to look at the needs of automated vehicles. And as a consequence, they're waiting for somebody else to do it. That's not uncommon in the municipal world, but it is true. And as we go along, I guess now, together with Scott, will be those saying, well, that all sounds quite lovely, but here's what cities haven't done yet, and the province and the federal government, to address these issues.
Thank you, Michael. You've jumped us forward into the. That was going to be my first question, and as the wet blanket, I was going to address that first question to you. The question being, are municipalities ready? So you've already answered that question.
Sure.
Can you give us some
Sorry, Dan,
examples
you're
around
breaking
why
up.
you
Can
think
you repeat the
municipalities
question, please?
That's unfortunate. My computer has entered fan hot mode, so hopefully that will it'll cool down. This won't be a continued problem for the panel. The question, Michael, is in terms of municipal readiness. Yes, I'll turn off my camera and see if that helps.
Sure.
In terms of municipal readiness, can you give us some examples as to why you think municipalities
let me give you a
are not
example,
ready for the
small in
coming
size,
autonomous
as well
revolution?
as a small and easily fixed. Looking only at the city of Toronto and the city of Ottawa, when we did a paper on this about 3.5 years ago, what we discovered is, to no one's surprise, vehicles are not allowed on sidewalks. The bylaws of both municipalities provide that. So sidewalk robots, as part of last mile delivery, are not permitted. When you see families riding their bikes along sidewalks, that's not permitted either. And similarly, if you look at the bike paths, which are becoming more and more ubiquitous in larger centers, vehicles are not allowed there either. So that's a small example of something that will have to change. But it extends to issues, for example, of potential liabilities. If there's an accident involving an automated vehicle, who's responsible? Is it the manufacturer? Is it the municipality who built the roads? Is it the contractor who may have made a mistake in how the roads were built? Is it the software engineers who wrote the program code? And And then you get into issues of smart roads and dumb roads, and how does that work? Insurance companies are going to be really interested in answering that question before they're prepared to put insurance on automated vehicles. Those are two examples, but there are others.
Michael, I'm gonna cut in here, and
okay, I can go on for 45 minutes, so do that.
And we'll come back to some of the other examples, but you've hit on one that I think is very relevant to the panelists on the panel here. So I'm going to give them an opportunity to interject with their thoughts. And I apologize to the audience if you can hear some background. It's my fan in my computer. I'll stay off video, and hopefully the fan will calm down. And I'll go on mute while I'm not talking. Anyway, the sidewalk robot issue is, I think, hits close to home to Bern Grush. There is no existing sidewalk traffic act, and I think Bern's been active in this space. So Bern, let me pass the conversation over to you on this for a moment, and see what you can add to this sidewalk conversation.
Thanks, Dan. Part of the issue for what Michael's addressing is municipalities not being ready. You have to give municipalities a break. Ready for what? We've been hyping the heck out of this technology. We've not said exactly what it's going to look like. I can't imagine a municipality really knows how to set regulations. Some of the municipalities that have funding can study it. Toronto's doing a great job of studying it, but it's very difficult to set regulations. It's very difficult to set to decide what exactly the infrastructure should look like. For example, just the issue of sidewalk robots themselves, which is, I know it's not a new idea, and it's been around for a couple of years, but it's just gotten municipal attention in the last, I would say, the last 18 months or 24 months. Only a couple of cities have studied it. Already San Francisco said, no, take them out of here, and then changed their mind and said, okay, we'll study it. So we're so early in this, we're not even, municipalities aren't even sure that they should permit them or not, much less how they should permit them, how they should license them, how they should be insured. And most of all, and this is what the work that I do with the international standard is, how are they going to be managed? In other words, you saw earlier today, one of the images from IBI Group, they showed a sidewalk with like 40 or 50 robots plying on that one sidewalk. Well, that's obviously unworkable. I don't think anyone would say that makes sense. But how is it that that gets regulated? How does a city say only 4 at a time, or 3 at a time, or 9 at a time? More complicated, how does the city say it's okay to have 3 over here, and it's okay to have 6 over there, and it's not okay to have any at all on that sidewalk? So how does that manage? And the standards is for that. But it's very, very early for municipalities to actually know what to do. And they're really in a tight spot, I think. And so that's a fundamental concern for that.
Bern, maybe dive a little deeper on these sidewalk robots. Walk us through how a sidewalk robot is currently implemented, and then maybe we can talk about what does it mean. Where does that lead us in terms of what we need to do? So first, start off by giving us a deeper dive into the sidewalk robot itself and its interaction.
So far, all robots are teleoperated. So you saw the picture of the Jeffrey in Toronto. There's a person sitting on a joystick in an office a few blocks away that's actually guiding that machine. Some sidewalk robots are entirely guided, 100% guided by an operator. Some are partially guided by an operator. So the ones, for example, from the company called Starship, those are, they claim they're 98% self. In other words, it's like a level 3 conditional. They are almost always can handle their own circumstance unless they come to a situation where they can't handle it. And then the person on a joystick, the person in the control room, takes over. So here's the advanced state of these on sidewalks. Now there are automated robots in special circumstances, military and so on, but let's just talk about only the sidewalk. Those robots have to have a human watching them, teleoperated. The very best that is the status now is that some of these companies, one person can operate 2 or 3 or 4 at a time. The goal is for one person to operate 10 at a time. No, not that. And you can imagine a set of 30 operators all looking at 15 screens like a big control room and the sort of trading off. That's somewhat in the distance, but that gives us a viable system once we get to that point, and we're on our way to that. That's just the operational side. The real problem is that we don't know how yet to measure readiness. So is this particular block face ready for 2 or 4 or 8 at a time? Are the residents and retailers that live or operate on this block face, do they want them? Are they willing to have them? How many are they willing to tolerate? Or are they going to lobby against them and so forth? So all of that's unknown as well. So, you know, again, back to Michael's point, municipalities are behind, because I'm saying, behind on what? You haven't told me enough of the problem for me to decide as a municipality to make any decisions or to provide any regulation.
I'm going to go a little deeper with you, Bern, before I pass it off to our other panelists here. So, in terms of these sidewalk robots, it seems to me we need some type of system in place that it currently doesn't exist. And you recently wrote a paper on international standards for robot passengers in goods vehicles. What are some of the issues that you flagged in that paper?
Well, you need a ground control system, and the ground control system for robo-taxis, let's talk about robo-taxis just for a minute. Right now, if a taxi, an Uber or a taxi or a truck wants to park somewhere, and you saw IBI showed there's just a bunch of signs, you look at all the parking signs to figure out where you can pull over. If you're in a taxi or an Uber ride hailing, generally the vehicle stops often in the throughway, or it might pull a little bit to the side of the road. It would often park on top of a bicycle lane. That sort of behavior, quick unload or load behavior, double parking and so forth, that's not workable in an automated world. You can kind of get away with it a little bit, and that's what we've been doing for the last 100 years with cars and taxis, but that's not going to work with automated vehicles, stopping on a bicycle lane and so forth. So the very first thing that has to happen for those systems, there has to be a reservation. And if that reservation is not freed up for some mishap of some sort, you have to be able to re-reserve or bump that vehicle to another spot. So you're on your way somewhere, there's a spot for you, it's not available. It has to tell the system, the V2X system has to tell your vehicle to go to spot 31 instead of spot 17, and so forth. And then it gets more complicated because maybe that spot is not close enough, because maybe your passenger is on a wheelchair, and maybe that the other spots that are available are not suitable for that person to get out of the vehicle in that circumstance. So then what happens? Does the taxi return to origin? Does it circle the block until a spot clears up? Does it flash lights and stop in the middle of the road? So those rules, the regulations for how that vehicle should behave, are unwritten. That's just, I'll let that go for that's just the robo-taxi and the automated truck. Consider now the sidewalk. This is a space that's not ever been automated before. You know, people have taken bicycles and skateboards on sidewalks, but that's not a space for machines that are unaccompanied by humans. So that's new. If we do this, then how fast can they go? How heavy can they be? How many can there be and so forth? That has to be set locally, maybe set block by block by a municipality that lays out a map of what's permitted where. Then how does the company go back to that Jeffrey? How does that Jeffrey machine know that it can go on that sidewalk at that time at the weight and size that it is? So it needs to query a system. I need to go from A to B. When can I do that? Or can I do that now? Or can I do that at my size and weight and so forth? So however that's negotiated, it's negotiated between the robot or the machine or the operator of that machine and the infrastructure, the sidewalk or the curb. So the sidewalk is much more complicated than the curb. If we think that we don't know how to handle ride hailing, which we don't, the sidewalk is much worse. Again, back to Michael's point, we haven't described enough, we haven't defined a problem and a solution well enough for the municipalities to adopt it. And so, anyways, to cut it short, that's what the standard is about. The standard is about setting the procedures and protocol and data so that such a VTX system can be written, but the standard is not writing a system.
Right. And I think the system is something we want to touch on it again. But I want to bring in the other two panelists that haven't had a chance to talk yet. I do want to encourage all of the panelists, all four of you, if you have an add-on thought to what any of your co-panelists are speaking on, feel free to interject, interrupt, ask questions of each other. But I do want to bring in Scott and Jamie here. So let me start off by bringing in Scott. Bern and Michael we've started the conversation identifying some challenges that we're going to have to overcome. In terms of OGRA, Scott, where do you see OGRA playing, and what's OGRA bringing to the table in this in regard to these challenges?
Perspective in real politic. I think what we have seen over time is, I mean, let's go back. 1894, we found an organization. The primary modality on the roads at the time's horse, right? And we're trying to build roads for that. We've seen a lot of change in the course of the last century and a quarter. This just feels like the latest iteration. And every time one of these technological advances happens, one of these innovations that happen, they end up bumping up against the realities of what it's like to be in local government. Local government has an outsized sense of responsibility for a whole host of everyday considerations for constituents. Transportation is one of them. They also have almost no capacity, or relatively no capacity, to actually, to the point Michael raised, have disposable capital that they can put towards maximizing the potential or the perceived potential of these innovations. And I know we didn't come here for a constitutional discussion on the allocation of fiscal responsibilities between orders of government, but in fact, it's a reality. What was set out between municipalities, provinces, and the federal government in 1867 doesn't really have a lot of, the resonance to today is getting a little stretched. I think the other thing that happens is municipalities tend to be, so through the road authorities, they tend to be the environment where all this experimentation takes place. And I'm sure Michael can tell you absolute hair-raising stories about what liability looks like in municipal roadways. The tort law environment ensures that regardless of whatever sort of pontificating we do here, municipalities will get sued for egregious amounts of money when one of these devices goes wrong. I think that is a fundamental aspect of any sort of roadway management, is that given the nature of some of the way liability is apportioned in Ontario, that they will be left holding some of the real world development costs. I don't know. I'm just the reality of how these devices move from theoretical concepts to real world application. That said, we're very optimistic. We see the benefits of this. We're cautious, though, that if Ottawa and Toronto are struggling to find the resources to prepare for this, Puss Lynch and the nation municipality in Northwestern Ontario have absolutely no hope. So I think that really what we might be able to offer is a sense that given the right circumstances, municipalities, I think, can be important partners in moving forward these technologies. But we also need to caution industry that they need to understand the realities municipalities find themselves in more broadly. And I'm sure you can allow that.
Yeah, you mentioned municipalities kind of need to be engaged in pilot projects, and I think that's a good opening to bring Jamie in. Jamie, I'll ask you to join the conversation here. Feel free to bring any thoughts on the previous pieces that we've talked about, but more specifically, I'd kind of like to ask you, kind of bring some of the technology into this discussion now and talk about how municipalities are leveraging this new and coming future technology for the betterment of transportation, and maybe talk to some of the pilots that the Durham region has taken on.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Pleased to share. You know, I think a lot of the comments that the other panelists have made already are spot on, and you know, having worked at the provincial level, trying to think through what a framework for this technology looks like to cover all potential uses in all locations, interacting with all infrastructure. It is overwhelming. It's overwhelming at that level. So you can imagine at the municipal level, where I completely agree, there's not big R&D budgets that can be leveraged to support the scaling up of the technologies. It's a daunting challenge. What I like about the work we're doing now at Durham Region Transit, it is a more focused look at the technology. So the opportunity to identify, define, test out specific use cases where we're leveraging the technology to a specific outcome. And I think a lot of times, you know, we get focused with just the deployment of the technology and lose sight of perhaps what we're trying to achieve from the technology. And I think that needs to stay front and center. And as a public transit entity, you know, we want to ensure the technology is being leveraged to reinforce transit as the most efficient means of moving the large numbers of people through our transportation network. And so, you know, you think through, we need to test out the technology. We also need to think through some of the policy and regulatory considerations that need to be put in place to again, reinforce those travel choices that offer maximum public benefit when it comes to things like congestion management and sustainability and so on. So we've got a couple of things that are underway, and a couple other things that we're exploring right now. You know, the first I'll mention is a pilot of an autonomous shuttle that we're looking at in kind of a first mile, last mile scenario, operating on a 6-kilometer loop out of Whitby Station in the south area of Whitby down to the waterfront back. We're doing that in partnership with the town of Whitby, Metrolinx, and SmartCone Technologies. I think Jason Lee probably touched on the project in the previous presentation. So we're excited to see that. It's an opportunity for us to assess whether there's, as I say, a use case and a business case to deploy these types of technologies in some of our lower demand areas that aren't suited to full-size conventional bus service. So it's a way we can reach into, particularly, you know, suburban areas, lower densities that aren't as suited to supporting transit ridership, where you can extend the reach of transit into those areas and connect people back into your broader network of services. And in that way, we can redeploy our buses into our higher volume corridors, increasing the intensity or the frequency and span of service along those corridors. So, you know, it's really a very specific, focused use case, and we're you know, insurance issues were touched on as well by Scott, and certainly that's an issue that we confront as a municipality, and the level of risk that can be assumed when you're testing these new technologies. So safety is front and center, and we're pleased with SmartCone and the deployment of their smart infrastructure system, providing an added layer of safety, offering advanced visual and audio alerts to other road users along the route that can ensure everybody's aware of the vehicle operating in the area. The other key area where we're looking to leverage the technology is more on the connected side, and there may be even more potential there with connected technologies in supporting increased reliability of transit service. So we've been working with our traffic engineers and Fortran to test out an AVEN-funded project for transit signal technology. Connected systems that you know, they'll hold the light for the bus as it approaches, improving reliability of the service, reducing travel times, improving fuel efficiency, and other related operating savings that go with that. So those are a couple of exciting projects, and then we're also engaged with a company called eCamion, funded through AVEN to test out other electric fast charging electric bus systems that we're excited as well. As I say, ultimately our vision is, whether it's through, I said the expanded DRT on-demand micro transit service that we launched this past year, whether it's through autonomous shuttles that can help collect people closer to where they live, connect them into a fleet of zero emission, high frequency electrified transit service. That's ultimately where we're looking to get to, and some of these activities are our first step along that progress.
Thank you, Jamie. I want to, we are quickly running out of time on this panel, unfortunately, with so many interesting pieces of conversation yet to be brought out. But I don't want to ignore the audience. So we've got an audience question here, I think, for you, Jamie, and perhaps for you, Michael. Is there a legal clarity yet on status or ownership of data from infrastructure sensors? What does it mean to a municipality to have rich data, like a product such as smart cone delivers? And I just want to comment, add on to that audience question, Jamie. In terms of infrastructure, I know the Fortran project has been very lean in terms of infrastructure. It's basically an iPad and a bus, which is great. On the smart cone piece, though, you do get into more infrastructure costs, and maybe talk to the legality, the data question, and then also what are the added benefits to that infrastructure in the smart cone project. And then, Michael, I'll pass it off to you to kind of carry on the thought there, if you don't mind.
So let me jump in. The short answer is not a chance. Is there any clarity around this? And one of the things is, Scott talked about 430 members of AMO. Good for them, because there's only 444 municipalities in Ontario, but they range in size from the tiniest of them to Toronto. And on the smallest of them, the issue of contractual arrangements are likely to be dictated by suppliers. On the largest of them, there's going to be a more equal bargaining power in the discussions around contracts. But there's no legislation that deals with this. There's unlikely to be legislation that deals with any of this, and it's all going to be contract driven. And so, if there's 444 municipalities in Ontario, there's likely to be at least a couple hundred different models of how this is going to work.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jim.
I was going to say, I don't think I have an answer, like the big answer to what this is. I can say on our specific project, all partners, the project agreement is key in setting out what the expectations are around the sharing of that data and who has access to it. And certainly that's the key information from these types of tests is, you imagine the interest across the various partners in accessing that data, because that's part of what we're trying to assess. The whole purpose is to evaluate, determine whether there is a broader use case. So that's a key part of the partnership agreements that are being entered into between the various parties. The bigger question is a key one that I think we are going to have to grapple with. We talked about the transit signal priority systems. We're excited to look at opportunities to expand its use across our network within Durham region. But we do have services that do cross municipal boundaries into other jurisdictions as well. So, we have one of our highest volume corridors also serves or does pickups and drop-offs within the city of Toronto as well. So, eventually we'd like to deploy this type of system along that corridor. To be able to use it in Toronto will require us to, enter into arrangements to have, say, our vehicles communicating with their traffic signals. And so there are questions of data rights and access considerations that will need to be sorted out. And that is going to be, and I think we acknowledge here, one of the key steps in that municipal preparedness that's going to need to come. And that interoperability across what are essentially invisible boundaries that we travel across on transit for goods movement purposes every day. Is part of that equation, certainly. Within Durham region, we have 8 local municipalities, as well as the region, as well as the province that operate roads. So, as I say, interoperability of infrastructure and technology that's deployed across the various authorities is going to be critical.
Thank you, Jim. I think you've hit on a key question there, and I think that's with the remaining time we have, I think this is the question that we all need to jump in on here is the interoperability of the systems. And I think both Scott, Michael, and Bern have valuable input on this piece of conversation. So I'll open it up and say, who would like to jump in first?
So
I was just going to say, when we look at transportation, when we look at horizontal coordination between municipalities when it comes to transportation, we have difficulty with things like snow removal. That is a decidedly more straightforward process than data standards and APIs and sharing agreements and whatever else may be attached to this idea. There is, to the point Michael raised, 444 municipalities. The last question that was put to us was the second half of that question was what's the value of this data potentially to municipalities? It's considerable, but the reality is very few of them actually have the resources to be able to harness this data, to be able to analyze the data, and to be able to draw or extrapolate knowledge from the data, and that's a lost opportunity. The success of the transportation system as it works now, to Jamie's point, is that those boundaries that exist are invisible. If you're driving along the road, it's, you know, there's standards there that allow for continuity between jurisdictions. The road doesn't fundamentally alter on the 401 as you pass through municipalities or a provincial highway, or even, you know, if you travel along the length of Bloor Street. And that same, there's an absence of that same approach here. And I think the risk that we see is this sort of balkanized approach to how we actually manage these innovations in a way that allows for collective good to be harnessed from.
I don't know if Bern or Michael would like to jump in. I know each of you have some valuable insight on this interoperability question.
So it's going to take senior levels of government, the province and the federal government, to assist in dealing with this. So at the federal level, I'll use the example of anti-idling bylaws. The anti-idling bylaws that exist largely across the country were a product originally developed by the feds. Now, they sent this out into the municipal ether, and municipalities took that and they customized it. And so no two municipalities that are identical in how they deal with idling. But they're similar. I think some element of that is going to have to be dealt with by the feds, or at least by the province. And I also think, to a certain extent, there's going to have to be imposed standards by the provinces, because, you know, the GTA is a perfect example. As Scott's observed, you travel from one municipality to another seamlessly. That vehicle's got to work the same. That vehicle's got to work the same from one municipality to the next. It's not as pronounced a problem in much of the rest of the province, because when the Harris government imposed amalgamation and the Ottawa area, for example, collapsed from 11 municipalities to 1, there actually is now rural land that lies between the outskirts of Ottawa and other municipalities. But um, um, it's going to have to get standardized, or we are going to end up with a balkanized system, some of it dictated by the suppliers and some of it dictated by larger municipalities, and some combination in between. So it's going to take it's going to take senior levels of government to deal with this. I mean, but in other areas. So, for example, Amazon a few years ago was awarded a U.S. patent for an airborne distribution center that would hover at 45,000 feet and use UAVs to make deliveries within minutes. Except UAVs at the moment can't be flown higher than 90 meters above ground and may not be flown closer than 75 meters from people, animals, building structures, or vehicles. Well, the feds are going to have to deal with that as well, because not all of these automated systems are land-based. We can't wait for the municipalities to deal with it.
Yeah, so thank you for that insight, Michael. I'm going to cut it off there, and I'm going to thank you for the Amazon example. I think it's a very interesting one, and that unfortunately we don't have time to flesh out, but in our conversation around Amazon and mobile manufacturing facilities as well is another very interesting example. But I want to get give Bern a chance to jump in here, because he's done some very deep dive on this interoperability question, specifically around ISO 4448. So Bern, I want to give you a chance to talk about, not just from a policy perspective, but also perhaps from a technology or a platform perspective. How we tackle this interoperability question?
Yeah, there's actually a second half to interoperability. The geographic interoperability from municipality, absolutely critical. But it's also the case that when you're going to operate fleets together, different fleets. So, for example, I'll just pick UPS and FedEx are going to operate in the same city. They're going to use the same loading areas. They may even interoperate with Uber, sharing loading areas with passengers. But let's just pick those two companies. They have to interoperate. They're going to interoperate via a V2X system, but there absolutely has to be interoperation. Otherwise, those companies couldn't reserve and couldn't plan their logistics for their deliveries. So there's a whole second level of interoperability. In other words, automation is not going to work full stop, without interoperation. And you also want it when FedEx goes to the next city, when they go from Toronto to Montreal, they still want to be able to operate in a very similar way. They don't want to have like a whole new Montreal-based loading unloading system to be different from the one that they're using in Vancouver. They want to use the same one. So we have to interoperate across the continent, not just across.
Quebec is a distinct society. So let's always bear that in mind.
Who is?
Quebec.
All right, we'll just stick with every. You understand my point. Is that you have to have interoperability to physically work the system, and you need interoperability to politically work the system. So the technology is going to force interoperability, or we don't get to use this. This last 15 years of automated everything is a complete waste of time unless we crack this interoperability problem. It's a bigger problem. And Scott, you've been dealing with it for what? 100? You told us 127 years.
Not personally.
It's now or never. Well, I didn't think you were that old, but it's now or never.
So we can have a great system in place that solves the interoperability question. Let's look hypothetically. Who's managing that system? Who owns that system?
Unresolved. Who is going to operate any V2X system? Like, you can't have FedEx operate their own privately. It has to be operated in a shared way. So all of the goods and all of the passenger movement and the transit has to be able to intercommunicate. Otherwise, how can an automated bus know when it can stop if some automated truck is sitting in the spot? So it all has to work together. This is all unexplored.
So what about air traffic control? Is that an example that we can look to?
Well, I use the analogy ground traffic control. I use the analogy air traffic control. But the sidewalk is harder. The sidewalk is way harder. But the curb, just the curb for trucks and cars, that's harder than an airport. It's not as dangerous as an airport crash, an airplane crash. However, we need to look to air traffic control as a model for a system for ground traffic control. So the analogy is good, except that the sidewalk is much harder.
And Scott, I think I cut you off there. Did you have one?
Yeah, well, no, I was just going to say, Michael pointed to other orders of government, the province or the feds, as being perhaps the balm to soothe some of these wounds. But I'm quite skeptical when it comes to data, and I've used this example countless times. The province currently allows us to, if we take one very rudimentary data standard, there are 4 acceptable widths with the government of Ontario for managing the width of a road. And the delta between the widest of those widths and the narrowest of those widths, when aggregated out over 305,000 center lane kilometers of municipal roads, is enormous. That is a one-dimensional measurement. This is not the IT revolution that we're talking about here. This is like point A to point B, and it's an indication. I mean, it's somewhat silly, but it's an indication of the, I think, approach that government has had to these sort of IT problems more broadly, in the sense they're not looking to actually provide prescriptions. And certainly at the local level, they're not looking to provide prescriptions. And frankly, I don't think you want them providing prescriptions. In many ways, I think the air traffic control is an interesting example. The internet's the other one. This was resolved, and patches have been put in place that allow the internet to largely function in a universal sort of way. But boy, if you're looking to local governments to fix these problems for you, to provide you with direction, or make you all play nicely together in the sandbox, to Bern's point, you've wasted a lot of time.
Go ahead, Jimmy.
Sorry, yeah, I was just add quickly. It may not be a direct active administration or whatever it is that manages this. There will likely need to be new pricing tools, I will say, that come into play at some point. We know as transportation electrifies, fuel taxes are not going to be able to today and support the level of infrastructure investment that's needed across our municipalities. So new pricing mechanisms that perhaps consider vehicle kilometers traveled and vehicle occupancy may be needed in order to ensure that our network continues to function as efficiently as it can.
The robo-taxis as well. So the sidewalk robots have to be priced as well. Those are commercial vehicles on public space. They will have to be priced.
All right, we've got 1 minute left here. I've got one question I'll throw at whoever wants to answer it. We can see that the adoption of CAV technologies is already a global race with very large economic implications, as well as potential benefits in safety and the environment, to name a few. Isn't the real issue getting regulators, legal, insurance, and other stakeholders at the table now to work on this now? We saw huge government and regulatory changes in response to COVID, and CAVs may be the technical equivalent. And I'll add on to that question. How can Ontario be a leader in this space? And we've got 1 minute left. Who would like to tackle that? I'll also invite you all to say a few closing remarks, very brief.
Yeah. Well, you know what? It is absolutely critical. The operations, the regulations are 100 times more complex than technology. I know that's shocking for anybody working in AI and deep learning and so on. The technology is not the holdup here. I understand we're not done with technology, but it's the regulations. The worst thing that could ever possibly happen to us is that we hit our dream of a cheap level 5 vehicle without any of these other issues sorted out, because we're going to end up in a mess far greater than the one we have now. So it's really all these other issues that are most important. And how the province can do that is focus on deployment systems and on regulatory innovations, and somewhat less so on the technology itself, and much more on the deployment and operations.
Thank you, Bern. Michael, any closing remarks?
Yeah, sure. I mean, listen, I said at the outset that we started looking at this 5 years ago. There's been no advance. in those 5 years. I've spoken to conferences involving senior levels of government and municipalities. At the end of the day, the only way this is going to work is if the manufacturers and suppliers end up with sitting down with Ontario and with the feds and say, guys, this isn't going to work unless you help us. Anyway, thank you, Dan, for involving me in this. It's been fun. You know, hopefully we talk a little longer next time.
Thank you, Michael. Jamie, on to you.
Yeah, you know, I think I touched on it before that, you know, it can't just be about deployment for the sake of deployment. We need to be leveraging the technologies to achieve a public benefit. And so, you know, municipalities have an important role to play in that. You know, I say on the transit side, we can either pretend this isn't happening, close our eyes and our ears and hope it goes away. But it's not going to happen. We know the technology is coming, perhaps not as quickly as initially expected, and we need to be thinking about how we can leverage it to, better connect people into transit and to supplement our system. And that's you know, that's what's key, and I think it's important, you know, as other municipalities consider their first steps, to look to other use cases that have been tested or deployed already, and see if they can take the next step, so we can move this along and do so in an orderly way. Otherwise, as Bern was talking to, we risk just kind of throwing it all out there and letting it sort itself out, and that rarely works out to the or achieves the public benefit that we want.
Thank you, Jamie. And Scott, just a brief.
Yeah, quickly. So Good Roads actually began as a social justice movement in the 1870s in the Northwest United States. And at that time, it was a response to a new innovative transportation technology called bicycles, which led to all sorts of social chaos as they were popular. It became more popular. Same thing was replicated when Henry Ford popularized or made cheap internal combustion engines. It takes a long time. There's some lag in there between the willingness of society to embrace these innovations and the ability of government to keep pace with the dynamics that they impose on society. I think that probably offers a lesson moving forward. It would be somewhat foolish to replicate those mistakes from that long ago. We do have examples that indicate it is possible. You know, I think it'll be interesting to see how this unfolds in the next little while. For a long time now, we've been told and sold on the promise of this, and we haven't seen much in the way of delays so far.
Thank you.
Robots.
Thank you very much.
Robots aside.
We are woefully over time. I just want to say that great job, guys. We could have, I think, filled a 2-hour panel discussion here. That speaks very highly to the organizers of this event and this panel in terms of who they've invited in. Great talk, lively discussion. Thank you for providing your time here today.